Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to a very special edition of Book Passages Conversations with Authors. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. I develop special programming for diversity and social justice. Before we get too deep into introductions, please take a minute to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It only takes you a couple seconds, and it really is a great way to support Book Passage. It's also great that you feel free to really participate in this event, not only by listening, but feel free to put comments and questions in the chat. And at the appropriate time, we'll definitely go through those questions. So I know there are many times when I say, I'm so excited about an event, or this is a special event. But honestly, on the scale from 1 to 10 on the specialness factor, this one's a 10. And I'm not exaggerating. This is not only because of the featured book, which I love. I love a good memoir. This is a fabulous memoir. But also because of the author and his special in conversation partner. At the age of 26, Michael Tubbs became the youngest mayor of any major city in America. In American history. As mayor of Stockton, California, Michael was lauded for his leadership and innovation. Under his stewardship, Stockton was named an all-American city with a 40% drop in homicides in 2018 and 2019, led the state of California in the decline of officer-involved shootings, also in 2019. He was named the second most fiscally healthy, not him, but the city. You're probably fiscally healthy, I don't know. But the city was considered the most fiscally healthy city in California. I didn't know that. If there was anyone who needed to do a memoir at a young age, it was Michael. Gibber the Roots chronicles his time of being Black and broke in Stockton, being influenced by strong women in his life, and going on to being awarded a scholarship at Stanford and an internship in the Obama White House. Now to the special conversation partner. Anna Malika Tubbs is a New York Times bestselling author, advocate, and educator. She has published articles on several different topics, and they've been featured in Time Magazine, Huffington Post, and many, many more publications. Her incredible debut book, The Three Mothers, How the Mothers of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation, was a New York Times bestseller and is now available in paperback at Book Passage. Oh, and did I mention that they're married to each other? With that, I'm going to leave Michael in the very capable hands of his wonderful and beautiful wife.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paula. That was so special. And I wish we could be together in person, but I'm grateful that we can still do this virtually. And I am really excited to interview my wonderful husband, Mr. Michael Tubbs. And I always find it fun when I get to do the interview because it can be a little different than some of the other talks that he does. And you've probably seen him all over the place. You know, this guy's on TV all the time doing these talks, but hopefully today we can give you something that's a little more unique, a little special, a conversation between the two of us. So, Michael, I wanted to approach this talk by thinking through the kind of characters that exist in your book. And I know you're going to do a reading, but I think I'm going to save that till the end before we get to audience questions. So everybody, there will be an opportunity for you to ask your questions as well at around the 45-minute mark. So please start typing them as they come to you so we can have a really great conversation at the end as well. But I want to talk about some of these characters, if you will, in your book and how they have not only defined you, but how they help us understand you and the work that you do, the work you did as mayor and the work that you're continuing to do now. So as I ask you about each of them, try not to mention other characters until we get to them. So this is a little bit of an exercise. So the first character that I want to approach and that I want people to think about, that I think helps us to better understand you and so much of what makes you who you are, is this city of Stockton, California. What is it that you think audience members need to know about Stockton in order to understand you, the man you've become, as well as the work that you are continuing to do outside of your position as mayor of Stockton?
Great question. And thank you, Book Passages, for having us. And thank you, Anna, for taking time out of your busy New York Times bestselling author, mother of two lives, to ask these questions. For those of you watching, it's kind of funny because originally I thought we'd be like in different rooms in our house, but we're literally on two different houses on two different sides of Los Angeles as our house is, our power is out today. And Stockton as a character really is just just the American city. I think it's a city that embodies so much promise and so much peril. It's a city that was a home of so much joy and also so much heartbreak. It's a city that has continued to be an inspiration and a challenge, and a city that really sort of helped ground me in values around what people deserve, around sort of the importance of diversity. Almost what I appreciate about Stockton is that it gives you a little bit of swag. You have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder coming from a place like that. And I think all those things and it's also the site of the vast majority of my work. So I think all those things make Stockton such an important and special character in the film, in the book, in addition to being a part of the setting or the majority of the setting.
Where is Stockton? Tell us about it. Tell us about the history of this diversity. What makes Stockton such a unique place for anyone who hasn't visited?
Yeah, so Stockton's in the Central Valley of California. So it's about an hour away from Sacramento and an hour and a half away from San Francisco. It's a city of about 315,000 people. So about bigger than Newark, New Jersey, bigger than Cincinnati, about 3 times the size of South Bend, Indiana. In a city that historically has been a place where a lot of people have come for refuge. We have a huge Cambodian, Hmong, Sikh, Pakistani, Filipino population. In fact, Stockton had more Filipino people living there than any other place outside the Philippines at one point in the early 20th century. It's a city that was almost the capital, and it was between Stockton, San Francisco, and Sacramento in the 1840s in terms of what would be the capital of California. It's the agricultural breadbasket of the world, and it's also the home of the first Sikh temple. And at the same time, it was the largest city to declare bankruptcy. When I was growing up, it led the state per capita in shootings and crime and homicides. It had one of the lowest literacy rates in the country. It's the largest city in the state of California and the second largest in the country without a public institution of higher learning. So you have sort of all these folks coming from all types of traumatic experiences, finding home in the fertile land, but also the lack of investment and really real structural challenges that make it such a beautiful, complex, and challenging place.
Yeah. And I think that's really important for people to know. And the Stockton that you were born in, the Stockton that you were raised in, as well as the Stockton that you came back to after going to Stanford University. So that takes me to my next set of questions around, again, 3 primary characters in your life. And obviously there's some resonance here with the book title of the book I wrote, The Three Mothers. And you have these 3 incredible mothers. So I want us to now talk about them, your mom, your aunt, your grandma, and how they have formed you, what the lessons were that they each taught you, and how those informed your path and your decision to come back to Stockton.
Yeah, and do I talk about them individually or collectively?
I want to talk about them individually. Take your time with it.
Okay. Well, part of the book is part like ode to particularly them, and what is so special about, I'm talking about them individually, but as a collective, what's special about them to me is just how representative and how extraordinarily ordinary. And there's regular, beautiful, brilliant Black women who just defied all odds. So I'll start with my grandmother, the matriarch. She's the real sort of spiritual bulwark of the family, and really gave me a strong spiritual footing and really taught me the importance of service. I talk about in the book how it wasn't until I got to Stanford that I realized that public service was something to be studied or was a choice, that there was you could choose to do service or choose not to do service, because it was never an option in my family. My grandma would have us go to the convalescent home every month and sing and read the Bible with and listen to and hug those in convalescent homes. She led the evangelism ministry at our church. So going door to door, talking to people, or helping folks who are homeless, et cetera, and feeding people. That was just so much a part of growing up and what it meant to be part of our family. And she was also a case manager. And I didn't realize this until actually post book, in terms of the work she did with helping people transition from welfare to work and really treating people with dignity and working with particularly poor women and helping them sort of reach their goals. And the last thing about her that's really interesting that I talk about in the book is that as a county employee, she made the choice to move from her office to be in community, to be kind of in the thick of where things were. And she was the only one who did that before it was a thing, before it was a best practice. And what's interesting about her is when you talk to her, everything's so matter of fact. Like she's like, well, like it's just not a big deal. She's like, yeah, I did that. I just wanted to be out with the people. It was easy to meet my clients, etc. So learned a lot from her. And then my aunt.
Actually, before we move on to your auntie, let's talk about how that connects then to some of the policies you mentioned in the book. All of these lessons that Nana teaches you, everything around service, rooting this in the Bible. How does that then propel you to say, I need to do this on a larger scale? I need to share these lessons with more people.
Yeah, I think from her, she really taught me this idea that she really taught me this idea that service was tantamount to being a person of faith. That to be a Christian meant you there was an action behind it beyond a profession of faith, that you had to do something. So I think it's when I got to Stanford and started doing service and learning service, I realized that there was nothing being taught to me. This is what my grandma had shown. And she also illustrated the importance of treating people with dignity. Like she never came home and talked about all these welfare moms she was working with, or it was never, that's why I didn't know what she did, because she always talked about her caseload with such joy and love and pride that I didn't realize these were the welfare mothers, or these were the poor mothers, or these were the folks on welfare, because she never talked about them as takers, but she always talked about them as humans who just need a little bit of help, that she was helping and serving. And I think that really informs sort of the views around basic income, the views around service, the views around what faith means, et cetera. And then my aunt, she's like a second mom to me. She's my mom's older sister. And she was the one who really saw early on that I loved reading and books. So part of the reason why I even wrote this book was because when I was a kid, she would always if I ever asked her to buy me a book, she would never say no. It's not like she had a lot of money, but we would go to Barnes and Noble and I would make her spend like hundreds of dollars on books. And I know I'm a kid. And she would just buy it and never complain, never said anything. She's probably still literally paying off credit card debt from books she bought me when I was a kid. But she was someone who really kind of allowed me to open my mind with books and reading. And I think, unlike my mom, she's a lot softer, a lot more emotional, a lot warmer. So I think just in terms of being a people person and being around people, and the importance of having a community of friends that you're close with, I learned that from her, because we grew up with her friends and her as our aunts, and her friends' kids as our cousins, and we all grew up together. And she was someone who's always been incredibly welcoming to people and new experiences. And I think I learned a lot from her about that. And then my mom, she is probably, the memoir is really about her, at least the first 3/4. And she is, I think, embodies a lot of the paradoxes of Stockton. And I think of being human. She was incredibly young when she had me. She was single and did an incredible job. And I realized, particularly now with having kids, that what was special, and I'm gonna get to her individually, what was special about all three of them is that despite not having money or resources or connections, we were the center of their world. Like everything revolved around us. It was us. It was like, what are the kids doing today? And it was thinking about us every single hour for the most part, which I realized was such a gift, and a gift that even people with resources and means oftentimes don't have from their parents. But my mom, she's incredibly determined, very strong will. She won't take no for an answer. She responds to challenges. She works incredibly hard. Like I literally have never seen her take a day off, particularly growing up. I never saw her get her nails done. I never saw her do anything for herself. It was always work, sleep, work, make sure you guys are okay, you guys are good. And I think she really instilled in me a sense of possibility, that I could be whatever I wanted to be, that that our circumstances weren't because of me, and they didn't reflect sort of who I was or who I could be. But if I just worked extremely hard, I could do a lot and do a lot better. So I think I get a lot of my determination from her, and my willingness to dream and not take no for an answer. And I think I've been really blessed, and the book is really about sort of how all three of them just did an incredible job of parenting, despite on the surface, people would say they were bad parents because they were single, or they were not good parents because they were a Black woman, and et cetera. And part of the work of the book was to really dispel some of those notions and myths, and really talk about poverty as an evil structural thing, but not the people living in poverty. That the people living in poverty are strong, resilient, beautiful, brilliant, and have so much to teach us and offer.
That's beautiful. And so you mentioned that she is someone who you call your she daddy. Can you tell us what this means and why you refer to her this way? And also maybe relating it, because your book so much focuses on your life, of course, but what it means in terms of what's happening in our nation and the history of our country, and how different systems have operated against us in order to create circumstances where families are divided. And so you use this personal narrative to walk us through not only your life, but through the policies that you see are the ways that will get us to this vision you have for what's possible in this country. And I want to hear more about that connection, even stemming from this notion of this is your she daddy. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. It's funny now in 2022 hearing that term, but in 1994, 95, it's a very radical notion. And it really came from kindergarten, our first grade. We were making like cards or something for Father's Day. And I came home, I was like, Mom, like, we gotta make cards for Father's Day tomorrow. Like, my dad's not here. Like, who do I make this card to? And she's like, don't worry about it. You have a she daddy, so you can just make your card out to she daddy. So I remember I wrote my card out to she daddy, and my teacher called my mom, like, what is he talking about? Like, the assignment was to make a Father's Day card, and your son made a card for his she daddy. The teacher was so confused. And I think it was my mom's sort of way of normalizing or providing language around sort of her being a single parent and her having to fulfill the role of mom and dad, and being able to the best of her ability, provide, protect, etc. And I think, and she was put in that position because my father has been incarcerated since the time he was 17 when I was born, up until now as a 31-year-old. And to your point, part of what I want to do in the book is to really show how the policy is personal, that we talk about sort of children of single parents or children whose parents are incarcerated in the macro, but I want to have a real micro conversation about, no, this is what it's actually like growing up in those circumstances, and how all those things are intersecting because of mass incarceration. And the 3 strikes law, you have a child born without a father, you have a single mother who has to work incredibly hard, but in low wage work because she's not able to go to school because she can't afford the childcare to go to school. And then if she did afford childcare, she wouldn't be able to pay for housing. And then in the environment, in the context of a city that's been divested in the neighborhoods that have been redlined, in communities with more liquor stores and grocery stores. So I try to walk people through sort of the architecture of poverty and what it looks like, and how it's not just one thing, but all these things are intersecting and related, and have everything to do with the schools you go to and the opportunities you have, et cetera.
So let's then talk about you and the way in which people have spoken about you even before this book, how there's been this celebration of you as an exception, as, look, he could do it. His mom, his aunt, his grandma, despite the circumstances, they were able to make it work. Look at this star. What is something you want to say in regards to that, in terms of you, Michael Tubbs, as a character again of exceptionalism? And what were you trying to do in the book to speak to that, or to speak against that notion, in using your own story to advance something forward, again, nationally?
Yeah, I realized when I was in college, I realized when I won the Alice Walker's essay contest as a high school senior, I'm talking about my mom and dad, how that, what was normal to me was like, oh my gosh, incredible to like so many people. And that at 18-year-old, I begin to believe this myth of exceptionalism that, okay, well, maybe I'm just special and maybe I'm just chosen and maybe I'm exceptional. I work hard. If people worked hard, they can make it too. Some of my friends were lazy. Some of my friends didn't study. And that's why we're at different situations in life. And then when I got to college and started reading about structure and started understanding policies and started understanding the way institutions are organized to produce such outcomes, that's why I began to really get upset when people would use my story and weaponize it against other people in poverty or other people with incarcerated parents or other people from communities with low literacy and college attainment rates. And I said, well, what's not going to happen is that my story is going to be used in a way that makes other people in similar situations feel like it's their fault, that they were born in terrible environments that were caused by terrible policy choices. And I mean, like I talk about this in the book a lot too. My favorite poem is The Rose I Grew from Concrete poem from Tupac, which talks about and really lifts up, elevates this ability of a rose to grow from concrete. So I thought that was sort of the frame. And then in college, I recognized that the issue, that you could be happy about a rose growing from concrete, but the real issue is that why would roses need to grow from concrete in the first place? That the real work is like removing the concrete and allowing roses to grow from rose bushes. So and so a big part of my work as a teacher, before that as a motivational speaker, and as a council member and mayor was to really let people understand that my story isn't a story of I can do it, you can do it too. But my story is about all the work that we all need to do to make more stories like mine possible. And that sort of, it's not even our very language, exceptionalism. Like by our very language, we're saying this is not supposed to happen, which is a sad indictment because there's millions of kids in this country who are in poverty. There's millions of kids in this country with incarcerated parents. There's millions of kids in this country trapped in terrible schools. And the idea that one has to be, and we don't expect exceptionalism of anyone else. I know a lot of unexceptional wealthy people. I know a lot of unexceptional people who are successful. Like I know a lot of like very average or below average people who have their basic needs met. So why should people who start off with less have to be superhuman in order to compensate? I think it's completely ridiculous. And I wanted the book to really trouble that notion. And let's have a memoir. But it's not going to be a memoir about pull yourself up by your bootstrap. It's going to be a memoir about how, because of insane policy choices and the lies we tell each other about our society and how it's organized, some people will still find a way through it, but that we're all collectively guilty and have a collective responsibility to really do the work to change environments so we can have more success stories and more stories of social mobility.
Absolutely love that. And I think that brings us to some of the work that you're doing right now and your recent launch with Epic. So I want to talk about that, but also through the lens of you as a father and us having 2 children and what that means for the future you're trying to create for them, and connecting that to very specifically this launch of Epic, ending poverty in California. And maybe even for readers, again, who haven't read the book yet, how we leave this book and get to Epic. And there's also 2 children that appear in between.
Wow, okay.
You can do it.
I'm going to do it. No, so the book ends actually with me losing re-election. And it ends with sort of thinking about what's next and a rumination on sort of governing during COVID, governing during Black Lives Matter, the birth of our first child, Malachi. And what was really clear, even in that writing process, was that I really do abhor poverty and I really do hate unequal opportunity structures. And it's sort of from that loss of giving and I talk about this in the book, using like valley experiences as mountain to get to mountaintop ones, meaning like in the valleys or in the low points, you learn character, you learn something that prepares you for the next height or the next climb. And in that particular valley experience, I learned that I just absolutely hate poverty, that win, lose, or draw, a big part of my work in this life will be ending poverty. Like, how do we do it? Why do we want it? Who does it benefit, et cetera? And that's from that vein that End Poverty in California was launched, which is an initiative focused on getting the state organized and excited and energized around what can we do to end poverty in California? Because if we can't end it in California, we can't end it anywhere in this country, in my opinion. To answer your question?
You didn't bring the kids into it. So
I did. I said,
as a father.
That was the part about the
How
kids.
does that inspire your work that you're continuing to perform?
Yeah, I think sort of our kids. I mean, everyone says it's about their kids, but I mean it. Like, our kids are so special and they just deserve everything. And I would just hate for our children to grow. Like, I would hate for our daughter to grow up in a world where she's like paid less than men, because like that's stupid to me. Or I hate for our son to be treated differently or be looked at differently by his teachers, by officers, by loan applications, because he's black. Like that, like the things we had to live with. I just feel like I hate them so much. I would hate for that to be passed down to our children, because they don't deserve that. They deserve a world, like I said in the dedication of the book, where roses grow on rose bushes, like, a world that's functional. I think for them, partly because of sort of your success, et cetera, that their world will be different from mine. So I also want to kind of fight for them in terms of the environment they live in, but fight for kids like me who aren't going to have two author parents, who aren't going to have two Stanford educated parents, who still are God's children, who are still smart, who are still beautiful. So I think Malachi and Nehemiah just really sharpened and focused the stakes, because I just don't want to read a book by Malachi and Nehemiah and they talking about the same stuff. Like, that would really break my heart. And I just think they deserve so much more.
What would you say then are some of your primary inspirations? So beyond the book, beyond us hearing about these three women who raised you, and of course the city that raised you, as well as the children that you're raising, who are the other people in this world and in our history that are important in who you have become?
Honestly, that's pretty much it. And then I would add Mary Wright Elderman, the leader of the Children's Defense Fund. She's such an incredible leader and thinker, and taught me community organizing, and it really just gave me a window to how policy and relationships, how you could use relationships to influence policy, particularly for those who have voices but oftentimes aren't heard. And then, yeah, I think that's in Jesus, of course.
Jesus, of course. Okay, then what about some authors that inspired your writing?
I think watching you finish your book, I was like, I got to get on this. Like, I got to get my book out. It's possible, you can do it. And then also, I think the way you talked about how the way you use sort of stories to illustrate wider points, I thought was really interesting. I used to read a lot. So I remember reading like Walter Dean Myers as a kid. And I mean, those books were just so good to me. And I was like, I want to write something that kids were like, oh, this is my book. Like, this is my inspiration. And then a whole bunch of coming of age memoirs, like Man Child in the Promised Land, Makes You Want to Holler, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, Dreams of My Father, like all these stories, particularly like Black men, all three of Frederick Douglass' autobiographies, like all these, Up From Slavery, Booker T. Washington, like all these stories of Black men who were coming of age and figuring out adulthood really inspired me. So I remember growing up saying it would be really cool one day to write a book that's as helpful for someone else as these books were for me. And then, of course, I mean, I don't have the skill, but like the way Alice Walker and Toni Morrison and others have been able to conceptualize new ways of being, new ways of relating as humans, just really have shifted collective thinking and consciousness. It's so powerful.
Now that you've written your first book, are there other books that you're already thinking, I want to write this? This is something that I need to put in this form? No. None?
Yeah, I'm not you. I don't like writing. So this is it for now. Maybe 50 years from now, I'll write part 2 before I go. This is what I learned since the first book. Here's 50 years worth. But no, I think I'm more interested in storytelling in other mediums like TV, podcasts, like etc. It's because writing is so lonely and isolating and hard and eternal. Like, took a lot. If I had something to say, I would do it again. But I don't know what else I have to say. At least for a couple of years, I'm good.
Okay, so I'm going to take that to one of our audience questions, and then we're going to break for the book reading so that more people can have some time to ask any questions that they have, and then we'll get back to some of the other audience questions that are waiting for us. So the first one is to both of us. Were you working on your respective books at the same time or with some overlap? And if so, how were we able to manage our time to put these great books out? Thank you, great books, that was very kind, while creating a beautiful young family. So I'll let you start.
You go. I've been talking. You go first.
This is about you. We're highlighting your book.
It's about both of us. They said for both of y'all. I didn't give birth. Like I was in nursing and writing. Like, you know.
There, that's true. These are important points. Yes, there was some overlap with us writing it. Michael actually sold his book before I did, and so I like to joke that I lapped him on that because I really wanted to get my book out there into the world and make sure that people knew these three women's stories. And so there was this overlap where we were both writing books, expecting our son, and then later, once my book came out, then on my book tour, we were expecting our daughter. And how did we manage our time? I often joke that, you know, we don't want to make it seem like this was easy for us at any moment or that we even have found the right balance today. I think it's a kind of day by day process where we're figuring it out. We have some goals that we're each trying to reach each day. And sometimes we hit all of those, sometimes we don't. But there's a lot of mutual support. And from the moment that Michael and I met when we were in undergrad, we've been together for 10 years now. We met when I was 19 and he was 21. It was very clear to us that we were both kind of on our own journeys and on our own paths, and that together, if we were going to come together, we could support each other in that rather than either of us feeling like we had to choose one thing over the other. There was just so much inspiration between the two of us. We could share ideas with each other. And so that has always really helped to make it feel like we could continue on those journeys by bringing them together in a really cool and beautiful way. And I'm proud of us for accomplishing that, but that doesn't mean that it's always been easy. We had one moment in particular actually where we both had a 6 a.m. interview the next day and neither of us had told each other. And we realized, oh no, someone has to be here to watch Malachi. So it's also been very helpful for us to have a village of people, a community of people, the three women who we've spoken about during this talk. When we call grandma and say, hey, can you be here at 5:30 tomorrow morning to watch Malachi? Mike and I forgot to tell each other that we both have something going on. So it's just those moments that kind of, you know, trying to communicate with each other as much as possible and also relying on everyone around us and really accepting that help so that we can continue the path that we both were dreaming of being on when we were only 19 and 21. You have anything to add to that?
Not much. I would say I think the other confounding variable was also like a mayor at the same time. So it's just
right.
So I would do
and
most
I was
of my
getting
writing.
my PhD. I forgot to say that.
So I would do most of my writing between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. and then just make it work.
Kind of crazy times. You asked us that. It's such a good question. Okay, so I think this is a good time for us to hear from your own voice. For those who haven't listened to the audiobook themselves, to hear a little bit from the book and maybe tell us why you've chosen this particular passage and how it's representative of the rest of it.
Yeah, I let me pull it up first. I chose this passage because it's towards the end in the epilogue, and I don't think people read epilogues, but I'm really proud of my epilogue. And I think it also sort of encapsulates really my mindset during kind of 2020. And I wrote this when did I write this? I think I wrote this even before I lost re-election, but it was really encapsulate how I'm feeling. And it's the last 2 paragraphs. And it goes like this. Let me start with, let's see. Well, you're in this part too, so I'll start with your part. Let's see. So it might be a little bit long. Honest redirection was a necessary one, putting into focus one of the functions of white supremacy. to dehumanize, either causing us to see others as non-humans or to force ourselves to be superhuman in compensation, to not feel, to not grieve, to not hurt, just to do. Honest insight caused me to well up with tears as for the first time, I gave myself permission to be vulnerable. My emotions bubbled up. I felt hurt. I felt angry. I felt sad. I felt that more needed to be done. I felt doubt about whether the work that I dedicated my life to was worth it. I felt scared for Michael Malachi. As a Black human in the United States of America in 2020, I felt a shared experience that James Baldwin diagnosed when he said, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time. The feeling I had in 2020 because of COVID and the extrajudicial murders of Black people, and that I still have today, is the same rage I felt the entire 4 years with Donald Trump in the White House, which is the same rage I felt when I was repeatedly kicked out of class or told I was going to Stanford just because I was Black, which was the same rage I had at my father's incarceration, which was the same rage I had while watching my mom, my aunt, and Nana put in superhuman effort to raise me and my siblings, which is the same rage I felt when Donnell was murdered, which is the same rage that brought me to run for city council and for mayor. Yes, this rage is not new. It's a companion that I've learned to channel into inspiration, into energy, to ensure that the setup is upset as I am, as we are upset. This rage is rooted in faith, the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, an active faith that is alive with works, with communal efforts to ensure our better angels are reflected in the type of society we build. This rage is rooted in love, a deep, abiding love in the possibilities of the future, in the best of all of us, a love that's not anemic, but ferocious and demanding more and wanting better for all of us. Rage, faith, love, the three stones I will wield, that we will wield as righteous weapons to ensure liberty and justice once and for all.
Beautiful. Okay, so a reminder to everybody, this is a great time to get your questions in if you have any for Michael or for me. And here is one of them, another audience question. After hitting a professional high mark of being the youngest mayor of a major US city in American history, do you have other political aspirations?
I'm really focused on ending poverty in California. So I think there's a non-political office holder way to do that. But being 31 years old, I'm open to running for office again in the future, but I'm definitely in no hurry.
Fair, that's fair. In the passage that you read, you mentioned upsetting the setup. Can you tell us what this means? Where did you get this phrase from? And again, how do we see evidence of that in all of your work?
Yeah, I stole this phrase from my friend. She had a blog called Upset the Setup. And I was like, that's such a brilliant phrase. And she's like, really? I was like, yeah. And she was using it more as like a counter fashion thing. But at the same time, I was thinking a lot about structure versus agency. And really Upset the Setup is about first acknowledging that there is a setup, that our society is set up and organized in ways to create these outcomes. These outcomes are disparate. These outcomes are unjust. These outcomes that aren't because of effort, ability, or merit. So that's a reality. But then I think it's also very limiting and very dehumanizing to say, well, that's just the way it is. You can't change it. So that's where the upset comes from. And it's about sort of how do we acknowledge that truth, but how do we use our agency to change that? And because upset is set up backwards, I think it's a really cool play on words that illustrates kind of that point and how those things are symbiotic and related. And that was really sort of how I organized myself as a council person, as a mayor, was really about, okay, how do we change these structures? So that's why we started doing things like guaranteed income. That's why we started the Stockton Scholarship Program to make, because the setup was that Stockton's one of the least literate cities in the country, has the lowest college attainment rate in the country, or one of the lowest. And that's the setup. So the upset was, let's create a scholarship program so that every single student who graduates is guaranteed a 2-year, 4-year trade school scholarship. It's really signaling an expectation that despite the structure, we're going to exercise agency to get you to help reverse that trend. Same thing we did with gun violence reduction, in that We knew there were certain guys in our community who are most likely to be victims and perpetrators of gun crimes. So to upset that, we really targeted and focused on them with opportunity, just like we would with jails, and saw that reduction in homicides that was mentioned. And then even like there was stuff we did with green lighting and environmental justice, where there were certain communities in Stockton that were set up for poverty through redlining, through literally banks circling and saying, you know, all these houses here, we're not going to give loans to, or we're going to undervalue these homes. These homes just ain't it. And we're not going to plant trees in this area as well, so it's going to be hotter there. We're going to put all the pollutants and toxins in this area so kids have asthma, et cetera. And the upset of that was working with the state to put in $10 million as a start. So you think about, how do we change these environmental toxins? How do we sort of raise property values? How do you make sure folks have access to jobs in the green economy? So that's the work we're engaged in with EPIC, with a focus on narrative this time. So talking through, how do we change the stories we tell about poverty, about folks who are struggling? How do we really recognize that, again, it's not an individual moral failure, it's a collective moral failure.
With everything that you're mentioning, obviously that all sounds so heavy, so difficult, but there's so many problems that are continuing to pile up for us. So how is it that you keep your hope alive, your optimism, if you have it, and what's a message that you can give to this audience around tackling these various large issues?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think, despite how imperfect things are, it's in some ways more perfect than they were. And it's only more perfect than they were because someone else had hope for us. Like someone else looked 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations down and said, even if not in my lifetime, those after me should enjoy this. And I take that very seriously and understand that everything I've been given is because someone had faith. Someone saw me, someone saw something. And we're like, you know what, even if I don't get to experience it, it's worth fighting for. Number two, I think pessimism is such a luxury. Like you could be pessimistic, or you could be, and think about the dinner we had last night. Like you could be like very pessimistic, and you could be very like, the world is going to end and blah, blah, blah. If you're comfortable, if your bills are paid, if your kids have, like if everything's good for you, you could be like, oh, society's not going to change, because that doesn't necessarily impact you viscerally the same way it does. And folks who are really struggling, the folks who are really on the underside of all these structures, they have to have hope, because that's the only way you wake up and live. They have to have hope for themselves or for their children, right? That like, or what will be the point of striving and working these jobs with terrible wages, et cetera. And then I think the third thing, just as a person of faith, it's just realizing that, like, there's a work, you're here for a reason. There's something for you to do, and things can always be better. And not in this, and just being upset about something's not going to change it, or just being sad about something is not going to change it. And you don't know if you'll be successful ultimately or not, but I don't know. I just feel like you have to try. And that's what, and then in the book, I talk about when I was in South Africa, and I was really, really sad because it just felt so heavy and so intractable. And I was like, nothing's going to change. And I remember at that same time hearing children outside playing and laughing and kicking, like literally in the middle of a war, just happy. And I was like, wow, if the kids haven't given up hope, who am I to? Because they're going to be around here longer, but these kids were still playing. And I think about that often, how sort of folks are still waking up, kids are still playing, kids are still looking at us like, okay, I believe you guys are going to fix it. I believe there's going to be a world worth living in when I'm older. And I think that gives me a lot of inspiration as well.
That's powerful. Okay, 2 more audience questions so far, but we have time for more if anyone still is wanting to write some. The first is, do you see tackling specifically the homelessness issue in California as being a big part of the poverty issue?
Yeah, I think homelessness is caused by so many things. I mean, it's related to so many things. Substance abuse disorders, mental health disorders, et cetera. But at the root of it, it's that you can't even treat those things if people are unhoused. Like those things become even worse when you're on the streets and living in Skid Row, et cetera. So I think what we know in California is that we have the highest homelessness rate and also the least number of affordable housing units. Like folks can't afford housing in California. And that's definitely part of what we have to tackle.
how closely did you work with President Obama, or were you able to observe him while you were interning? What was his influence on you politically and personally, if at all?
Yeah, I didn't get to work with, I was like an intern. So a very, very lowly intern. I was writing news clips and getting sodas for people mostly. But I was able to observe him a couple times. There was one story where I was staffing one of his staffers and he was in the hallway and the staffer like left me by myself and threw all his papers at me and ran to go talk to the president. And the president saw that, walked past the staffer. I was like, young man, what's your name? And like talked with me for like a minute, short conversation. But in that, I learned a valuable lesson that he was trying to teach a staffer that you treat everyone with respect. He's the president, and he saw a staffer like leave the intern and went past the staffer to talk to the intern, like, no, everyone's important. And just in terms of leadership, that's super important to model that for your staff. It's something I learned. I think sort of like anybody, my first vote, anyone my age, my first vote was for President Obama. So he was I remember reading Dreams from My Father when I was 14. Fun fact, I was the first person in Stockton to buy Audacity of Hope. So I made my Aunt Tasha drive me there when Barnes & Noble opened, so I could get the book before school. And I was the first one to buy it. So a big inspiration politically in showing what was possible. But I think also showing what's not possible in politics as well, and sort of the trade-offs, concessions of things you have to do. So I think even now, and particularly when I was mayor, I would think about sort of in the choices I was making, like, wow, imagine what Obama had to deal with as the first Black mayor of a country, in a country with a history of racism, in a country with so many problems, in a country where there's so much work to do. And what do you, in political capital, being political capital, like how do you spend it and use it? So I think, but the times are different. But I think I'm probably a little bit more progressive, a little bit more radical than President Obama, but maybe that's why he's President Obama and I'm ex-Mayor Michael Tubbs.
That's a great answer. Okay, so this is a question for both of us. I know Michael says he doesn't like to write and the next book isn't on his radar, but is there any chance the two of you would collaborate on a book project? That would be amazing.
Yeah, if Anna writes it, I'm down. If I can just talk, if I can be like, all right, this is what I think we should talk about. Here, these are my words, and we transcribe it and she edited it, I'm down for that. Like, do that tomorrow.
That is so funny because so many times when he was saying that you were saying you didn't want to write this book and you're like, I need to write this book. Will you write it for me? And I said, yeah, if you give me credit. And you said, you should be a ghostwriter. I said, absolutely not. I write about Black women who are erased, so I'm not going to do that for you.
Ghostwriters are compensated. You wouldn't be erased, you'd be compensated.
But no, I could see us writing something together. Yeah. We're always surprised that people don't put us in these kinds of conversations more often together. So I think there's going to be more of that down the line. We'll see. I don't know what it would be about, but could be cool.
It could be The Wait Part 2.
The what?
I'm making fun of Devon Franklin and Megan Good. You know, they had that book.
Oh no, Michael Tubbs. That was not. Okay.
I wasn't making fun. I was like, we can just do Part 2. I mean, there's a model. They've done it.
Okay, yeah. The next question is, what's next for me in terms of books? Yeah, I'm very excited. I'll be working on, well, first I've been working on a novel for the last several years. I'm sorry, there's a alarm going on outside. I don't know if you all can hear it. But I hope to have that sold soon. And it's about two main characters. One is a young boy whose life is entirely dictated by fake news, and he just doesn't know that. And another is a young woman who's losing her freedom in the development of an abusive relationship, and the reader is trying to figure out how the two relate to each other in time and in space. So I've been working on that for even longer than The Three Mothers, but it takes a little while longer to perfect your fiction and get your deal for that. So I'm excited about that. I'm working on 2 children's books as well. And then there will be 2 more nonfictions, but I will share more news about that in the next coming weeks, so stay tuned. Okay, so who were the primary audience members you had in mind, Mike, as you were writing this book? Who were you thinking about that would be holding your book in their hands, and what was it that you wanted them to walk away with?
Yeah, I was thinking about the kids I taught, right? I was thinking about like 12. First, it was like, what would 12-year-old me like to hear? A 13-year-old Michael, what would be a good lesson for him? And it was like, what would be a good book to teach the kids in my book club or to teach the kids in my classroom, like what would be a good story that they could tell and see themselves reflected in and give them hope. So those were my primary motivations or audiences. And what I really wanted folks to get from the book was talent and intellect is universal, but resources and opportunities are not. Number two, the importance of caring mentors. Like caring adult is not a policy solution, but it can make a difference in one life. And then number three, just the work we have to do to make this country great. That this country has great potential, but we have to do the work to really get it to be where it can be. And then number four, that politics isn't necessarily always fun. It can be dirty, it can be difficult, but it's so necessary in that folks impacted by problems absolutely have to be part of policy solutions. They absolutely should be at the table, and they shouldn't just be receiving services. They should be designing services. They should be at the head of the table, setting the agenda, figuring out where the resources go.
Wonderful. And I think our time is up, unfortunately, but this was so much fun. And I am delighted to welcome Paula back on screen.
Oh, thank you both. I'm actually coming back just a little bit early because I have a few comments. Bear with me. One of the things I heard, Anna, I think you said, I'm surprised more people don't ask us to do this together. Prompts me to tell you the history of me asking like 5 times.
We didn't get it.
Email. Oh, Michael can pick his in conversation partner, like a friend, an author friend, a political friend, and then I put in parentheses, or Anna. Like the publicist never acknowledged it or whatever. So then finally, at the very end, they were like, oh yeah, by the way, his conversation partner is going to be.
Oh, I'm so glad you did that. Thank you.
So I just wanted you to know you were both on my radar from the beginning.
You're the best. Thank you.
I'm thinking like, oh, they probably get asked all the time and they're sick of it, you know. But
maybe we just don't know that we're getting asked.
There you go. There you go. And Michael, I'm so glad you brought up Obama's book, Dream from My Father, because as I was starting to read your book, that's kind of a place I went to. Like I haven't read Obama's book in a long time, but that's what I thought of. It made me think of that and the influence of strong women in his life, like his grandmother, his mother, and an absent father. But also just kind of the voice. I feel like you're selling yourself short, and you actually have a really good voice.
Thank you.
For a compelling book, nonfiction book, definitely. And with that, I also want to remind everybody that I did not oversell this pairing. You are my evidence. I think you're a literary dynamic duo and a presentation dynamic duo. And I think you're both so fantastic personally, individually, and collectively, that in my mind, we're like best friends and hanging out and having a drink and talking about books and politics. Or at the very least, in my second life, I'm going to be one of your kids. I'll take one or the other. But for now, I'll just settle for being your host for this fantastic event.
Oh,
thank you so much. I know you're both busy and you've got the 2 small children. So thank you for doing this and finding a place where there's electricity.
It's our honor. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. Thank you, Anna.
And I definitely want to remind the audience, whether you're live or you're joining us later in the archives, we have a lot of Michael's book, The Deeper the Roots, and also Anna's book, 3 Mothers. And maybe we'll even get some book plates from Michael, but we definitely have their books in stock, both Corte Madera store, San Francisco store, or you can just call us up and a bookseller will help you, or you can order online. We're happy to help and move this book, not only for Book Passage, but for these marvelous authors. We do want to encourage them to do more and come on Book Passage more often. Maybe next time in person if you're in the area.
Well, yeah, that'd be fun.
We would love that.
Great, right? Yes. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for the Book Passage audience for showing up, for participating, putting in some good questions. And until next time, everybody be safe and healthy, and we'll see you again.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.